All right. Hello, everyone. This is Quentin Lister again. I'm here this week. I'm speaking with Denise Gascoigne, a registered dietitian and national board certified health and wellness coach, about nutrition and its implications in divorce. And I just wanted to, before we get started, I wanted to give Denise the opportunity to briefly introduce herself and give her contact information for those at home who would like to contact her after this video.
Sure. Thanks, Quentin. I'm happy to be here. And for those of you who are interested in nutrition, counseling, or health coaching services, I can be reached directly on my cell phone, area code 508-505-0015.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. And so Denise and I spoke a little bit before this interview, and we talked briefly about specific topics that we'd like to bring up at this time. And so I know that for one of those things, I know that as far as healthy eating habits and divorce are concerned, that Denise, you mentioned how it's kind of our goal that how the habits that we create as children, around food definitely influence our habits when we become adults. And in the process of like a divorce, or really in any relationship, no matter what stage it is, you want to reduce the conflict around habits around food, if I understood what you were saying correctly. And so my question is, what specifically do you see as something that helps reduce conflict? And well, first, what do you mean by reducing that conflict around eating schedule? And then two, like, how do you, what kind of things can you put in place to reduce those things?
Yeah, well, thanks for touching on that topic that we had discussed previously. Having gone through divorce myself, I know that the divorce process can bring up a lot of drama between the two parties, the parents. And ultimately, we know as parents that our goal is to protect our children and raise them in a way where they can thrive in childhood and beyond. And so it's within that spirit that I'm really coming from. And ultimately, there are lots of ways in which adults can nourish themselves and maybe want to nourish their children. And there may be differences of opinion between mothers and fathers about that, or if it's mothers and mothers and fathers, depending upon the parenting relationship that is going through a divorce. Ultimately, we're wanting to do right by our children. And so there's a lot of evidence to show that the less less drama we create around food in early childhood, adolescence, that bodes well for developing healthy habits in adulthood. Ultimately, our children are modeling themselves after us. And so the way in which we nourish ourselves as parents, and how we approach meal times and really prioritize our health, and particularly around the foods that we select and how we prepare those foods, the dynamics that we set around meal times, that's going to influence our children. And so being very mindful about that is important. And if there is a difference of opinions, let's say you have a parent who is vegan or vegetarian and one who, is more a meat and potatoes type of person, it's worth remembering as parents that we cannot control what happens in the home of our ex, and especially as it relates to our children. And as long as there is nothing deleterious, no deleterious harm happening to our child, then it's maybe not, it's worth laying down our sword, so to speak, related to that. Yeah. There's enough going on in the world to not have to nitpick about meal times.
Right. And I guess one follow-up question I have with that, and so, right, that like maybe, you have to choose your battles per se, and you don't, and so maybe there's some things that maybe it's just like, right, ultimately you can't control what happens in the home of the other parent, but what would be an example of something where you would want to say speak up about something? Would it be simply like if you notice that just like the kid, you just say like kids are like I'm not being fed at all, like I think that's like an obvious example, I guess, of something that comes to my mind. But for you as a nutritionist, what is something that like would be like, okay, regardless of, you know, whether or not I can control this or not, I do need to say something about this here? What would be an example of something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that if a child has a metabolic disorder or a food allergy that is severe, or some sort of intolerance, something like celiac sprue or gluten intolerance, where if they do eat or are exposed to that food product, it would cause them grave harm. Or if they're, you know, say not eating at all, then of course that's a concern, and that should be addressed between the parties, hopefully with finding a resolution. The kids are going to be very attuned to what's happening, and they may not be able to speak to it, but ultimately they're watching, even though they may not be piping up.
Sure. Right, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that answer. I wanted to give you the opportunity. You had mentioned that you chose specifically the background that you have right now on purpose, and so I wanted, if you wanted to address that, I wanted to give you the opportunity. If not, we can move on to the next subject. But if you wanted to address your background or anything like that, and point out anything, you're welcome to do so. So.
Yeah. So as a nutritionist and registered dietitian, I have interactions with individuals who ask me, well, what should I eat? And wanting some guidelines. And, you know, our USDA has come up with a number of iterations of guidelines. Currently the guideline is represented as my plate. Before it was the pyramid and then the 4 food groups. So it's had an evolution over the years. And, you know, I think that the My Plate is one of their best attempts at trying to help individuals choose what to eat. And particularly for children, this can actually work in your favor as a parent if you say give options for what to eat for dinner, or choose for lunches or breakfasts and things like that. But ultimately this visual representation, and I'll kind of move out of the way, it's essentially, you know, you can find plates like this, and of course this would be for someone in, you know, a child in early childhood, but it's helping them to start to get a visual idea of what to eat. And you know, there's lots of information out there, and ultimately we as children, you know, whatever age you are, human or adult, we want about half of our plate to be made up of fruits and vegetables, primarily vegetables and non-starchy vegetables. And, you know, and so that's, you know, that's essentially half of your plate. And then the other half of, you know, plate would be mixed of starch, which could be grains. It could also be starchy vegetables like corn or peas, and then a protein, which you can't see behind me. And, you know, and for a child in particular, dairy would be good for their growing bones. Now, some children do have dairy allergies, and there are milk alternatives, but we're trying to nourish the child with the 40 primary essential nutrients that they need, especially iron and calcium and B vitamins, things that they're needing, you know, the building blocks, and protein for their growing bodies. And also trying to help to establish an understanding of what makes a complete meal. Thinking along the lines of you know, being as close to the way that nature made the food, to how it comes to our plate. And just one other thing that I think, you know, as whether you're married or separated or going through divorce or divorced, you have an opportunity to really leverage the power and influence of your child in helping to be a decision maker in their own health. And by offering options for foods, getting them involved in the meal planning and preparation, there's been some studies to show that children are more likely to start developing cooking skills during, as divorced children in divorced families than not. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to engage and help them develop their skill sets. But with, the understanding of child development, that they're only going, we have to work with where they are at and honor that.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah. Well, yeah, let me see. I had one more question for you that I wanted to, I'm just looking at my notes here. And so one question that I thought might be, and so, I mean, you brought up a lot of good points. And I think that something that I see, at least in my work, I'm a legal secretary to a divorce attorney, and I see kind of the things that happen with him and his clients. And sometimes it's just like one major obstacle sometimes people face in divorce is just being tight on cash, especially if their divorce has gone on it's a very contentious divorce and it's gone on for a long time. And so what is like what's one simple thing to do to ensure like some form of healthy eating for both themselves and for their kids when money's tight, when you're on a budget, that kind of thing?
That's a really good question. And I know that, with inflation right now, price of food and commodities are going up. So there's kind of a false assumption that eating healthy is expensive. Frankly, eating healthy is really fits within a strict budget. And so the one thing that it will require, as an offset to cost, is some time and preparation. So offset with some sweat equity, so to speak.
Sure.
And so, an easy thing to think about is shopping the periphery of the grocery store. So, outside the middle aisles, things that aren't highly processed. Some middle aisle areas that you can shop within where you could find things that are less expensive are in dried beans or even canned beans. So you get a lot of bang for your buck with legumes and things like that. But ultimately, it's going to probably require some muscle flexing for being a savvy shopper and planning your meals and preparing your meals ahead of time. Oftentimes, as busy parents, whether married or divorced, we will opt to eat out more often. And that just, we don't have a lot of control over what the ingredients that go into the food that comes from a restaurant, especially fast food, the quality of product, as well as the preparation. And so once again, to circle back, as this being an opportunity time for you to engage your child in this process, and especially for helping them to develop good habits that'll carry them through to adulthood and beyond. It's the preparation and planning and preparation is really the best way. And looking for things that soups from scratch, and making batch cooking, freezing meals, and then pulling them out ahead of time. Just a little bit of planning goes a long way.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and it's about that time for us to wrap things up. But before we do that, I wanted to give you the opportunity again, Denise, to just share your contact information for those who were watching and would like to get in contact with you after viewing this video.
Yes, once again, Denise Gascoigne, area code 508-505-0015. And if I may just mention one other thing, and I kind of referenced it before, but oftentimes when you're wanting to enlist your children in the decision-making process around meals, instead of asking them, what do you want to eat? You, as the gatekeeper and the adult, offer them with options, such as, what would you like to eat? Stir fry, or casserole. You ultimately, once they are given options, they feel like they're empowered, but you're still, tempering those
Right.
scenarios.
Right. Right.
And that helps to minimize conflict.
Right. And you close some of the options and say like, pizza every time, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Or chicken nuggets or mac and cheese.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up before we ended. So thank you so much, Denise. And yeah, we'll end it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Quentin. Bye-bye.